The afternoon sun beat down hard on the streets of Jefferson City, baking the pavement and making the air shimmer like a mirage. It was one of those sticky summer days where even the birds seemed too tired to chirp. Near the edge of the state capitol grounds, a man in a dark navy suit stood beside his car, one knee bent as he examined a flat tire. He wasn't in a rush. He'd just wrapped up a long meeting and had a few minutes before his next appointment. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it for now. First, the tire. He wasn't flashy. No luxury sedan, no designer briefcase. Just a clean-cut black man in his late 40s, calm, focused, and dressed like someone who spent his days in courtrooms and government offices. He pulled out his phone to call roadside assistance, but before he could dial, he heard the slow roll of tires on asphalt behind him. 2 police cruisers pulled up, one after the other, their lights off but their presence heavy. The doors opened and 2 officers stepped out, both white, both with that familiar posture of authority that seemed to say, "We're in charge here." The older one, broad-shouldered with a thick mustache, walked ahead. The younger one followed, hand resting near his belt. "Afternoon," the older officer said, voice flat. "What are you doing here?" The man straightened up slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. "My tire's flat," he said evenly. "I was just about to call for help." The younger officer glanced at the car, then back at him. "You live around here?" "No," the man replied. "I work nearby." "Where?" "At the Capitol." The older officer narrowed his eyes slightly. "Doing what?" The man hesitated, not because he was hiding anything, but because he'd been through this before. Too many times. He knew how this could go if he said the wrong thing or sounded too smart or too calm. But he also knew his rights. "I'm legal counsel for the state," he said simply. The younger officer let out a short, skeptical laugh. "Right, and I'm the mayor." The older officer stepped closer. "Let's see some ID." The man reached slowly into his inside jacket pocket. "I'm going to get my wallet," he said clearly, keeping his movements visible. He pulled out his state-issued ID and handed it over. The officer glanced at it, then back at his face as if the photo might be a trick. "This says you're an attorney, but you're just standing here by a car with no one around. Looks suspicious." "I told you I have a flat tire," the man said, voice steady but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then you won't mind answering a few more questions?" the older officer said, folding his arms. The man exhaled quietly. He'd been here before, not in handcuffs, not yet, but in that gray zone where being black and professional didn't always protect you from being treated like a suspect. He looked around. A few people walked past on the sidewalk, glancing over but not stopping. No one intervened. No one ever did. "I'd like to make a call," he said. "To my office. They're expecting me." "You can do that after we clear this up," the younger officer cut in. "There's nothing to clear up," the man replied. "I'm not under arrest. I haven't committed a crime. You have no legal basis to detain me." That's when the older officer's expression hardened. "Watch your tone," he said. "You think just because you've got a fancy job you can talk to us like that?" "I'm not talking down to you," the man said, keeping his voice low. "I'm stating facts. The law is clear. You can't hold someone without reasonable suspicion of a crime. Standing by your car isn't a crime." The younger officer stepped forward. "You're being uncooperative." "I'm being compliant," the man corrected. "But I'm also asserting my rights." "There's a difference." That seemed to be the final straw. The older officer snapped his fingers. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "What? Why?" the man asked, stunned. "You're under arrest for obstruction and failure to comply." "That's not true," he said, voice rising slightly for the first time. "I've done exactly what you asked. I showed ID. I explained my situation. I haven't moved aggressively. I haven't refused anything. Turn around. Now." The officer barked. People on the sidewalk slowed. One woman pulled out her phone. The man saw her, and for a split second he felt a flicker of hope. Someone was watching. But he also knew footage didn't always change outcomes. He turned slowly, heart pounding now, not from fear of jail, but from the crushing weight of injustice repeating itself. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. They were tight, too tight, but he didn't flinch. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly as they walked him toward the cruiser. "Yeah," the younger officer muttered. "Another guy who thinks the rules don't apply to him." They shoved him into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud. Inside, the air was stale and hot. He leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed, breathing slowly to stay calm. His mind raced, not with panic but with clarity. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd been stopped for looking suspicious, every professional who'd been mistaken for a threat simply because of their skin color. His phone, still in his pocket, buzzed again, then again, and again. He couldn't answer it, couldn't explain where he was, couldn't tell his team he'd been arrested like a common criminal while standing beside his own car in broad daylight. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, turning toward the precinct. Through the window he saw the Capitol dome in the distance, symbol of law, justice, order. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his career upholding that system, believing in its potential to be fair. Now that same system had failed him in the most basic way. At the station, they led him inside through a side entrance, away from the main lobby. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant hung in the air. They sat him on a hard plastic chair in a small room with no windows. "Name?" the older officer demanded, standing over him. He looked up. "You have my ID. We're asking again," he paused. Then said, "John Doe." The younger officer snorted. "Seriously? If you're going to arrest me without cause," the man said evenly, "you can process me under a name that reflects how little you care about who I really am." The officers exchanged glances. One muttered something under his breath about attitude. They fingerprinted him, took his photo, emptied his pockets. Wallet, keys, phone. They placed his phone face down on the desk, ignoring the screen lighting up with incoming calls. Back in the holding cell, a narrow room with a metal bench and a stainless steel toilet, he sat quietly. No shouting, no demands, just silence. He thought about his mother, who'd warned him as a boy. Always carry your ID. Always speak respectfully. Always keep your hands visible. He'd followed every rule. And still, here he was. Outside, the world kept moving. Meetings happened. Decisions were made. Laws were debated. And inside this cell, a man who helped shape those laws sat in silence, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because someone decided he looked like he might. His phone kept ringing. Unknown to the officers, each call was more urgent than the last. His chief of staff was frantic. The governor's office was trying to reach him for an emergency briefing on a major police accountability bill, one he'd spent months drafting. They needed him, but no one knew where he was. The officers, meanwhile, filled out their report. Subject became belligerent, one wrote. Refused to cooperate. Claimed to work at the Capitol but provided no verification beyond ID. They didn't mention that he'd shown his state-issued credentials. They didn't note his calm tone or his repeated attempts to de-escalate. They painted a picture of defiance where there had been none. Hours passed. The man didn't sleep. He watched the clock on the wall through the small reinforced window in the door. 3:45 p.m. 4:20 p.m. 5:03 p.m. His stomach growled, but he didn't ask for food. He knew asking for anything might be twisted into complaint or resistance. Then around 5:30, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Not the usual heavy tread of patrol officers, but quicker, sharper. A woman's voice, urgent, commanding, cut through the quiet. "Where is he?" The door opened. A captain stood there, face tight with alarm. Behind her, another officer held a tablet showing a news alert. State official missing. Governor's office concerned. The captain's eyes locked onto the man in the cell. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by dread. She turned to the two arresting officers who had just arrived, smirking, ready to process him further. "Did you run his ID through the state database?" she asked, voice low and dangerous. We assumed it was fake," the younger one stammered. The captain didn't yell. She didn't have to. Her silence was worse. She walked into the cell, unlocked the handcuffs herself, and handed back his belongings. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. He stood slowly, rubbing his wrists. He didn't say it's okay. He didn't say thank you. He just looked at her and said, "This happens to people who don't have titles every day, and no one comes looking for them." She had no answer to that. As he walked out of the precinct, his suit wrinkled, his tie crooked, his dignity bruised but intact, he didn't look back. He pulled out his phone, 27 missed calls, and dialed his office. "I'm on my way," he said. "And we need to talk about more than just policy. We need to talk about people." The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the city. He walked toward the Capitol not as a victim but as a witness, and he knew with quiet certainty that this moment, this injustice would not be forgotten. Not by him, not by the system he served, and not by the people who counted on that system to be fair. Because sometimes change doesn't start with a speech or a law. Sometimes it starts with a man standing by his car doing nothing wrong and being treated like he's done everything wrong. And sometimes that man has the power to make sure it never happens the same way again. The booking room smelled like old sweat, cheap soap, and the sharp tang of industrial cleaner that never quite covered the underlying stink of fear and frustration. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering just enough to make your eyes ache if you stared too long. He sat on a hard plastic chair, wrists still cuffed behind his back, shoulders stiff from being shoved into the cruiser and then marched through the precinct like a common criminal. His suit jacket was gone, taken during processing, and his white shirt was wrinkled, one sleeve slightly torn where an officer had yanked his arm too hard. Across the room, the two officers who'd arrested him stood near the desk, laughing quietly about something. The younger one kept glancing over, smirking like this was all some kind of joke. The older one filled out paperwork with slow, deliberate strokes, as if he were writing history instead of a flimsy report built on assumptions and bias. "All right. John Doe," the younger officer said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Time to get real? What's your actual name?" The man didn't look up. "I told you. John Doe." "Oh, come on," the officer scoffed. "You really think we're going to book you under a fake name? You're not in a movie." "I gave you my real ID," the man said calmly. "You chose not to believe it. So now you're stuck with the name you decided fits me best." The older officer slammed his pen down. "Enough. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just tell us who you are and maybe we cut you a break." "A break?" The man finally looked up, his eyes steady, voice low but clear. "You pulled me over for standing next to my own car. You ignored my identification. You twisted my calm questions into resistance. And now you want me to thank you for the chance to confess to a crime I didn't commit? That's not a break. That's coercion." The room went quiet. Even the officer behind the desk stopped typing. The younger cop stepped closer, voice dropping to a warning growl. "You keep talking like that and you're gonna spend the night in a cell with guys who don't care how fancy your shoes are." The man didn't flinch. He'd heard threats before. Veiled, direct, whispered in courtrooms and parking lots. He knew fear was a tool and he refused to let it work on him now. "I'm not afraid of your cell," he said. "I'm disappointed in your badge." That seemed to hit harder than shouting ever could. The younger officer's face flushed red, but before he could respond, the radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "Unit 42, respond to front desk. Urgent call from City Hall." Both officers exchanged a glance. City Hall didn't usually call patrol units, especially not about some suspicious loiterer. The older one grabbed the radio. "Copy that. On our way." They left him alone in the booking room, still cuffed, still seated. His phone confiscated and placed in a clear plastic bin on the counter, lit up again. A soft buzz, then another, and another. Each vibration echoed in the silence like a heartbeat. He watched it from the corner of his eye. He knew who was calling. His chief of staff, the governor's legal team, maybe even the attorney general's office. They'd noticed he was missing. Meetings had been scheduled. Documents needed his signature. Decisions hung in the balance. And here he was, treated like a nobody because he happened to be a black man in a nice suit standing near government property. Minutes stretched. The air felt heavier. He shifted slightly, trying to ease the pressure on his wrists. His mind wasn't racing with panic, it was calculating. Not revenge, not rage, but consequence. What happens next? How does a system that failed so publicly correct itself? And more importantly, how many others had been swallowed by this same machine without anyone ever noticing they were gone? Then footsteps. Fast, sharp, purposeful. Not the lazy swagger of patrol officers, but the stride of someone in charge. The door swung open. A woman in a crisp uniform, captain's bars on her shoulders, stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes wide. Behind her, a civilian staffer from the governor's office clutched a tablet. Screen glowing with a photo, the same man in the same suit, standing at a podium during a press conference just last week. The captain's gaze locked onto him. Her breath caught, "Oh my God," she whispered. She rushed forward, pulling a key from her belt. In seconds, the cuffs were off. She didn't say sorry right away. She was too stunned, too horrified. Instead, she turned to the two officers who had just walked back in, confused. "Did you run his ID through the state employee database?" she demanded, voice shaking with controlled fury. We thought it was fake," the younger one stammered. "He was acting weird." "Acting weird?" the captain shot back. "He was standing by a flat tire. And you arrested the governor's chief legal counsel over a suspicious person call from some office worker who probably just didn't like the way he looked." The older officer paled. "We didn't know. That's the problem," she snapped. "You didn't try to know. You saw a black man near the Capitol, assumed the worst, and never once considered he might actually belong here." She turned back to the man, her expression shifting to something close to shame. "Sir, I am so deeply sorry. This should never have happened." He rubbed his wrists, not looking at her, not yet. "It happens every day," he said quietly. "Just usually to people no one misses." She nodded, swallowing hard. "We're releasing you immediately. Full apology. And I'll personally oversee the internal review." He finally met her eyes. "I don't want an apology," he said. "I want accountability. Not just for me, for everyone this has happened to when no one was watching." She didn't argue. She just nodded again, slower this time, like she finally understood the weight of what had just unfolded. As they walked him out of the booking area, past the holding cells and the front desk, heads turned. Officers who'd been joking minutes earlier now looked away, suddenly very interested in their paperwork. A few stared openly, confused, trying to piece together how the man they'd mocked was now being escorted out like VIP. At the front counter, his belongings were returned. Wallet, keys, phone. His phone buzzed the second it touched his hand. He glanced at the screen. 32 missed calls. Texts piling up. "Where are you?" "Meeting delayed. Governor is asking for you." "Is everything okay?" He typed a quick message. "On my way. Everything's fine now," but it wasn't fine. Not really. Outside, the evening air was cooler, but the sun still hung low, casting long golden shadows. He stood on the precinct steps for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to shake off the feeling of being caged, judged, reduced to a stereotype. A black town car pulled up, sent by his office. The driver, an older man who'd driven him for years, stepped out with a look of relief. "Thank goodness," he said softly. "We were worried sick." He nodded, sliding into the back seat. The leather was cool, familiar, safe. As the car pulled away, he stared out the window at the city passing by, people walking home from work, kids playing on sidewalks, streetlights flickering on. Normal life. Uninterrupted. Unquestioned. He thought about the woman who'd called him suspicious. Probably never gave it a second thought. Just saw a black man near a government building and assumed danger. It wasn't malice, maybe. Just habit. Just bias so deep it felt like instinct. And that was the real problem. It wasn't always the loud racists. Sometimes it was the quiet assumptions, the ones that led good officers to treat citizens like suspects based on nothing but skin and circumstance. Back at the Capitol, his team swarmed him the moment he walked in. His chief of staff, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who'd been pacing the hallway, grabbed his arm. "Are you okay? What happened?" He gave her a brief version. No drama, no exaggeration, just facts. "They stopped me for a flat tire. Didn't believe who I was. Arrested me. Held me for 3 hours." She went white. "I'm calling the governor?" "No," he said gently. "Not yet. Let me think." He walked to his office, closed the door, and sat at his desk. The room was quiet, orderly. Books lined up, legal pads stacked neatly, a framed photo of his parents on the shelf. He picked up the photo, traced the edge with his thumb. His father, a postal worker. His mother, a schoolteacher. Both told him, "Work twice as hard. Be twice as polite. And even then, it might not be enough." Today proved they were right, but it also proved something else. That power could be a shield, but only if you had it. And most people didn't. His phone rang again. This time, it was the Attorney General's office. "We heard what happened," the voice said. "We're launching an inquiry. Do you want to press charges?" He thought about it. Pressing charges would mean depositions, headlines, maybe even a trial. It would drag the department through the mud, but it might also force real change. "I'll decide tomorrow," he said. "Tonight I need to sleep." But sleep didn't come easy. Later that night, alone in his apartment, he stood by the window, city lights twinkling below. He replayed every moment, the officer's tone, the smirk, the way they dismissed his ID like it was a prop. He remembered the cold metal of the cuffs, the smell of the cell, the silence when no one came to check on him. And then he thought about the thousands of others who'd been through worse, without a title, without a governor waiting for them, without a car to pick them up. He made a decision then, not out of anger, but out of responsibility. He wouldn't just walk away. He wouldn't just accept an apology and move on. Because if someone like him, with all his credentials, his position, his access, could be treated like a criminal for standing by his car, then the system wasn't just broken for others, it was broken for everyone. The next morning, he arrived at the Capitol earlier than usual. He called a meeting, not with the governor, not with the press, but with the head of the police union, the chief of police, and the director of the state's Civil Rights Commission. "I don't want to punish two officers," he told them over coffee in a quiet conference room. "I want to fix the pattern that made their actions possible." He laid out a proposal: mandatory implicit bias training, revised protocols for suspicious person stops, body cam reviews by independent panels, and a civilian oversight board with real power. The police chief looked uneasy. "That's a lot." "It's the minimum," he replied. "Because yesterday I was lucky. I had a title that got me out of handcuffs. But luck shouldn't be required for basic dignity." By noon, news of the arrest had leaked. A local reporter had gotten a tip. A blurry photo from a bystander's phone showed him being led to the cruiser. The headline read, "State's top lawyer arrested near Capitol. Police claim suspicious behavior." The story spread fast, but he didn't hide. He didn't issue a vague statement. Instead, he agreed to a short interview, not to play the victim, but to redirect the focus. "This isn't about me," he told the reporter. "It's about the fact that in this city a black man can be doing absolutely nothing wrong and still end up in handcuffs. My job title got me released. What protects the delivery driver? The college student? The grandfather walking home from the store?" The reporter nodded, eyes wide. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we make sure this never happens again, to anyone." And as he walked back to his office, he knew the real work was just beginning. Not the kind that made headlines, but the slow, hard work of changing minds, rewriting rules, and building a system where your skin color didn't determine whether you were seen as a citizen or a suspect. But for now, he had a flat tire to fix, and maybe this time he'd call a tow truck before stepping out of the car, not because he was afraid, but because he was tired. Tired of proving he belonged in a country that still made him feel like a guest in his own life. The news spread faster than anyone expected. By mid-morning, the story was everywhere. Local TV, radio talk shows, social media feeds lighting up with outrage, confusion, and in some corners, disbelief. "State's top lawyer arrested for standing by his car?" one headline read. Another, "Cops detain official near Capitol, claim he acted suspicious." A bystander's shaky phone video had surfaced, showing him calmly explaining his flat tire before being handcuffed. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No struggle. Just a quiet, dignified man being treated like a threat for no reason other than the color of his skin. At the precinct, the mood had shifted overnight. What had started as a routine arrest, just another non-compliant guy, now felt like a ticking bomb. Officers avoided the booking area. The two involved sat in separate rooms called in for administrative review. Their phones were taken. Their badges temporarily suspended. They weren't being punished, not officially, but everyone knew the ground had cracked beneath them. The older officer, the one who'd led the stop, sat with his head in his hands. He'd been on the force for 18 years. He'd told himself he was fair, that he treated everyone the same. But now, watching the video replay on a colleague's tablet, seeing his own face tight with suspicion, barking orders at a man who hadn't raised his voice once, he felt something shift inside him. Not guilt, not yet, but doubt. A cold, creeping question. Would I have done the same if he'd been white? The younger officer paced his small interview room like a caged animal. He kept muttering, he lied about who he was, as if that justified anything. But deep down he knew, He'd seen the ID, he'd just chosen not to believe it, because it didn't fit the story he'd already written in his head. Meanwhile, back at the Capitol, the man who'd been arrested wasn't hiding. He showed up early, dressed in a fresh suit, tie perfectly knotted, coffee in hand like any other Tuesday. But there was a new weight in his step, not anger but resolve. He'd slept little, but his mind was clear. He knew this moment could vanish like smoke if he didn't act fast. Public attention was fickle. Outrage faded. But policy lasted. He called a closed-door meeting with the governor's chief of staff, the attorney general, and the head of the state police. No press, no cameras, just 4 people in a quiet room with the blinds drawn. "I'm not here to demand punishment," he began, voice calm but firm. "I'm here to prevent this from happening again." He laid out what he wanted: an independent review of the arrest, mandatory retraining for all officers on implicit bias and de-escalation, and a new protocol requiring supervisors to approve any arrest based solely on suspicious behavior, without clear evidence of a crime. The police chief shifted uncomfortably. "That's going to slow down response times. Officers need discretion." "Discretion shouldn't mean discrimination," the man replied evenly. "Right now, suspicious is code for black man in the wrong place, and that's not policing. That's profiling." The attorney general nodded slowly. "He's right. We've had complaints for years. This is the first time someone with a platform got caught in the net." The governor's chief of staff leaned forward. "The governor wants to act, but he's worried about backlash from the union." "Then let the union explain why 2 officers couldn't tell the difference between a state official and a criminal," the man said. "Because if they can't do that, how can they protect the public?" By noon, a press release was drafted. The governor would hold a briefing that afternoon. The man agreed to stand beside him, not as a victim but as a partner in reform. But before that, something unexpected happened. A call came through to the precinct from the governor's office. Direct line. Captain Hayes, the one who'd rushed to release him the night before, answered it. Her face went pale as she listened. She hung up, then walked straight to the holding area where the 2 officers sat. "Get cleaned up," she told them, voice tight. "You're going to the Capitol." They exchanged nervous glances. "Why?" "Because the man you arrested wants to speak to you. Face to face." They didn't want to go, but they didn't have a choice. An hour later, they stood outside a modest office on the 3rd floor of the Capitol building. No grand courtroom, no media. Just a quiet room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the city. The door opened. He stepped in, not in a suit this time, but in a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, but his eyes were steady. "Come in," he said. They entered slowly, hats in hand, badges clipped but dull. They didn't sit until he gestured to the chairs. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, it was heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't bring you here to humiliate you. I don't want your jobs. I don't want your apologies. I want you to understand what happened yesterday and why it matters." The older officer cleared his throat. We thought you were lying about who you were." "Why?" the man asked gently. "What about me seemed like a liar?" The officer hesitated. "I don't know. You were too calm. Most people get nervous when cops show up." "So calmness equals guilt?" the man asked. "Or is it that a black man being calm in your presence feels unnatural to you?" The officer looked down. He didn't answer. The younger one shifted. "We get calls all the time about suspicious people. We have to check them out." "Of course you do," the man said. "But checking doesn't mean arresting. It means asking, observing, verifying. You had my ID, you had my state credentials. You even saw my car, registered to me. Yet you chose to believe I was pretending. Why?" No answer. He leaned forward slightly. "I've worked with police for 20 years. I've defended officers in court. I've written laws to protect them and the public. I believe in law enforcement. But I also believe it's broken in ways that hurt everyone, including good officers like you." He paused. "You arrested me because you saw a black man near a government building and assumed the worst. That's not your fault alone. It's the system you were trained in. The stories you've heard, the neighborhoods you've patrolled where suspicious always looks the same." He looked at each of them in turn. "But now you know better. And knowing better means doing better." The older officer finally spoke, voice rough. "What do we do now?" "You go back to your units," he said. "You take the retraining seriously. You question your instincts when they're based on looks, not actions. And if you see a colleague making the same mistake, you speak up." He stood. "Because next time it might not be me. It might be a kid walking home from school. Or a veteran waiting for the bus, and they won't have a governor calling to get them out." The two officers left quietly. Neither said thank you, but their shoulders were slumped not with shame but with the weight of something new. Awareness. Later that afternoon, the governor held his press conference.
Cameras flashed.
Reporters shouted questions. The man stood just behind the podium, not speaking but present, visible, undeniable. The governor announced an immediate review of the arrest, suspension of the officers pending investigation, and the formation of a task force on police accountability, co-chaired by the man himself. "We failed today," the governor said, "but we have a chance to do better, and we will." Afterward, a reporter pulled the man aside. "Are you going to sue?" He shook his head. "Lawsuits punish individuals. I want to fix the system." "But don't you feel angry?" He thought for a moment. "I feel responsible, because I got out, and so many others don't." That night, he didn't go home right away. He walked through the city past the spot where it happened. The flat tire had been fixed. His car sat quietly by the curb, just a car again. Nothing suspicious. Nothing threatening. He stood there for a while, watching people pass. Couples holding hands, students with backpacks, an elderly man feeding pigeons. None of them glanced twice at the vehicle. None of them saw danger, and that, he realized, was the goal. Not special treatment, not immunity. Just the simple, ordinary right to exist in public space without being seen as a threat. Back at his apartment, he poured a glass of water and sat by the window. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. Saw the news. "Are you all right?" He typed back, "I'm fine, Mom. Tired, but okay." She replied instantly, "You always were too strong for your own good." He smiled faintly. Maybe. But strength wasn't about enduring injustice. It was about changing it. The next morning, he met with community leaders, pastors, activists, parents who'd buried sons after traffic stops gone wrong. They didn't want speeches. They wanted action. He listened more than he spoke, took notes, promised nothing he couldn't deliver. By week's end, the task force held its first meeting. Police representatives sat across from civil rights advocates. Tension hung in the air like static. But the man kept the conversation focused, not on blame, but on solutions. Body cams always on. Clearer definitions of reasonable suspicion. Mental health responders for nonviolent calls. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't fix everything overnight. But it was a start. And as he left the meeting, walking down the Capitol steps under a clear blue sky, he felt something he hadn't in days. Hope. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that grows when people choose to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Because the truth was, he hadn't just been arrested that day. He'd been awakened. And now he wouldn't stop until the system saw everyone, not just the ones with titles, as worthy of dignity, respect, and the simple right to stand by their car without fear. The days after the press conference moved fast, like a river finally breaking through a dam. What had started as a private injustice, a man in cuffs for no good reason, was now a public reckoning. News vans camped outside the Capitol. Community groups organized rallies not with anger, but with purpose. Signs read, "Believe Black professionals," and "Suspicion isn't a crime." Even local businesses put up window decals. "We see you. We respect you." But the real change wasn't happening on the streets, it was happening in rooms most people never saw. Conference tables, city council chambers, late-night phone calls between officials who'd spent years avoiding hard conversations. And at the center of it all was the man who'd been arrested not as a symbol, but as a steady hand guiding the process forward. He didn't want headlines. He wanted policy. So while reporters chased sound bites, he sat with police trainers, legal scholars, and community organizers, hammering out what real reform would look like, not just slogans. Not just promises, actual rules that would change how officers acted on the street. One morning, he walked into a training facility on the edge of the city. It was a plain brick building, nothing fancy, just classrooms, a gym, and a firing range in the back. Today, though, it wasn't recruits learning to shoot. It was veteran officers learning to see. He stood in front of 30 men and women in uniform, some with decades on the job. A few avoided his eyes. Others watched him closely, curious. He didn't wear a suit this time, just slacks and a button-down, sleeves rolled up like he was ready to work. "I'm not here to accuse you," he began, voice calm. "No theatrics. I'm here because I believe most of you joined the force to help people. But somewhere along the way, the system taught you to see danger before dignity, especially in certain neighborhoods, certain faces." He paused. "I was arrested for standing by my car. Not running, not hiding, just standing. And the reason? Because I didn't fit the picture in someone's mind of who belongs near the Capitol." A woman in the back raised her hand. "But how do we know who's really who? People lie all the time." "You verify," he said. "You check. You don't assume. My ID was real. My car was registered to me. I offered to call my office. Instead, I was treated like a suspect because I asked why I was being detained. That's not security. That's fear." He spent the next 2 hours not lecturing but listening. Officers shared stories of being called to homes where families assumed they were there to harass, not help. Of second-guessing every call in certain zip codes. Of feeling trapped between public distrust and department pressure. "I get it," he said. "You're human. You carry your own biases, just like everyone else. But your badge gives you power. And power without awareness is dangerous." By the end, the room felt different, lighter, not fixed, but open. One officer, a gray-haired sergeant, approached him afterward. "I've been on the job 32 years, he said quietly. "I thought I was fair. But watching that video of you, I realized I've probably done the same thing. Just never got caught." "That's the point," the man replied. "It's not about getting caught. It's about doing better before someone gets hurt." Meanwhile, the 2 officers who'd made the arrest were going through their own reckoning. They'd been placed on administrative leave, desk duty, no patrol, required to attend the new bias training. At first, they sat in the back, arms crossed, like they were being punished. But as the sessions went on, role-playing scenarios, reviewing real body cam footage, hearing from families who'd lost loved ones to mistaken assumptions, something shifted. The younger officer started asking questions. "What if the person is lying?" he asked during one session. "How do we stay safe?" "Stay alert, not afraid," the trainer replied. "There's a difference. Fear makes you see threats everywhere. Awareness helps you see the real ones." He didn't say it out loud, but the younger officer began to wonder, had his fear that day been about safety or about control? Back at the Capitol, the task force was making progress. They drafted a new policy. Officers must clearly state the reason for any stop within 30 seconds. Suspicious behavior alone wasn't enough. You needed specific, observable actions. They also created a civilian review board with subpoena power, something the police union had fought for years. Now, with public pressure and the governor's backing, they had no choice but to agree. But not everyone was on board. Late one evening, the man received an anonymous letter slipped under his office door. No return address, just 2 sentences. "You're tearing down the thin blue line for your own ego. Be careful who you trust." He didn't panic. He'd expected pushback. Power doesn't give up quietly. But he also knew fear was a tactic and he wouldn't let it steer him. Instead, he doubled down on transparency. He held a town hall in a community center in the city's east side, a neighborhood where police stops were common but trust was rare. He didn't bring security. Just a microphone and a folding chair. People came, hundreds of them. Grandparents, teens, shop owners, pastors. Some were skeptical. "You got out because you're important," one woman said bluntly. "What about my son? He got arrested last month for jaywalking. No one called the governor for him." "You're right," he said, no defensiveness. "My title saved me." His didn't exist. "That's why we're changing the rules, not just for people like me, but for people like your son." He listened as they shared stories of being followed in stores, pulled over for broken taillights that turned out fine, handcuffed in front of their kids for matching a description. Each story was different, but the pain was the same, being treated like you don't belong in your own city. By the end of the night, the mood had shifted, not to blind trust, but to cautious hope. "Just keep showing up," an older man told him as he left. "That's all we ask," and he did. Weeks turned into months. The internal affairs investigation wrapped up. The report was clear. The arrest was unjustified. No criminal charges would be filed against the officers. They hadn't broken any laws, just poor judgment, but they'd violated department policy. The older officer, the one who'd led the stop, submitted his resignation. Not out of shame, he later told a reporter, but because I realized I wasn't the officer I thought I was. Maybe it's time for someone with fresher eyes. The younger officer stayed. He requested a transfer to the community outreach unit. I want to learn how to serve, not just enforce, he said in a quiet interview. He even started volunteering at a youth center, mentoring teens who'd had bad experiences with police. The man who'd been arrested didn't celebrate their choices, but he respected them. Change wasn't about punishment, it was about growth. Then came the biggest test, the state legislature. The task force's recommendations needed to become law, and that meant facing lawmakers who'd rather ignore the problem than fix it. He spent days testifying, not with anger, but with facts. He showed data. How suspicious person stops disproportionately targeted Black and brown residents. How most led to no arrests. How they eroded trust that took years to build. One senator known for opposing police reform challenged him. "Are you saying our officers are racist?" "No," he replied evenly. "I'm saying the system they work in has blind spots. And blind spots cause harm, even when no one means to." His calmness disarmed critics. Even opponents admitted he wasn't grandstanding. He genuinely wanted solutions. In the end, the bill passed, narrowly, but it passed. The Dignity in Policing Act became law. It included mandatory de-escalation training, limits on pretextual stops, and funding for mental health responders to handle nonviolent crises. The day it was signed, there was no big ceremony. Just a quiet signing in the governor's office, with community leaders and a few officers standing together, some in uniform, some in street clothes. Afterward, the man walked alone through the Capitol gardens. The sun was warm. Birds chirped. For the first time in months, he felt a moment of peace, but he knew this wasn't the end. Laws could be ignored. Training could become routine. Real change happened in the small moments, when an officer paused before making an assumption, when a dispatcher questioned a vague call, when a community member felt safe enough to call 911 without fear. He got a call that evening from his chief of staff. "The governor wants to know if you'll run the new oversight office." He thought about it. The job would be thankless, full of pushback, slow progress, but it mattered. "Yes," he said, "but only if we hire people who've lived this, not just studied it." She laughed. Already on it. That night he sat on his balcony looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but he opened it. It read, "My brother got stopped last week. Officer asked his name, checked his ID, wished him a good day. No cuffs, no fear. Thank you." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He just sat there watching the lights twinkle like stars. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd helped bend the arc a little closer to justice. Because real change wasn't about one arrest, one law, or one man. It was about thousands of small choices made every day, by people who decided to see each other as human first, and that, he knew, was worth every hard moment. A year had passed since the day he stood by his car with a flat tire and ended up in handcuffs. The seasons had turned. Summer heat gave way to fall leaves, then winter snow, and now spring was back, soft and green, like the city was breathing again. The headlines had faded. The news vans were long gone, but the work hadn't stopped. If anything, it had just settled into the bones of the system, quiet but steady, like roots growing under pavement. He still worked out of the same office in the Capitol, though his title had changed. He wasn't just legal counsel anymore. He now led the new Office of Public Safety Oversight, a small team tucked away on the 4th floor, far from the grand halls and press conferences. No fancy name on the door, just a simple plaque, Community Accountability and Reform. Most days it wasn't glamorous. He reviewed body cam footage not for drama, but for patterns. He met with families who'd lost someone to a traffic stop gone wrong, not to offer empty comfort, but to listen, document, and push for policy tweaks that might save the next life. He sat through budget meetings arguing for funding mental health responders instead of more patrol cars. He trained new cadets not with lectures but with real stories, like his own. One rainy Tuesday, he walked into a police academy classroom. The recruits, 20 of them, fresh-faced, nervous, stood when he entered. He waved them down. "Don't stand for me. Stand for the people you'll serve." He didn't tell them about his arrest right away. Instead, he asked questions. "What's the first thing you notice when you see someone on the street?" "Clothes," one said. "Body language," another offered. "Skin color," a young woman admitted quietly. He nodded. "That's honest. And that's where bias starts, not with hate, but with habit. Your brain fills in gaps with what it's seen before. The problem isn't noticing. It's acting on that notice without checking yourself." Then he told them his story, not as a victim, not as a hero, just as a man who'd been doing nothing wrong and was treated like a criminal. He showed them the body cam clip, short, silent, powerful. They watched as he calmly explained his flat tire, as the officers ignored his ID, as the cuffs clicked shut. Afterward, no one spoke for a full minute. Then a recruit raised his hand. What should they have done differently? Asked more. Assumed less, he said. Checked the ID in the system. Called my office to verify. Or better yet, trusted that a man standing by his own car might just be having a bad day with a tire. He left them with one thought. Your badge gives you authority, but your humanity gives you judgment. Don't let one drown out the other. Later that week, he visited a high school in the north end of the city, a neighborhood where too many kids had stories about being followed in stores or questioned for walking home. He didn't come as a government official. He came as a guest speaker for a civics class. The students were skeptical at first. "You work for the government," one boy said. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I've been where you are," he replied. "Not in this neighborhood, maybe, but in that feeling, like the system sees you as a problem, not a person." He told them about his parents, how they taught him to always carry his ID, speak politely, keep his hands visible. They weren't being paranoid. They were being practical, because they knew the world wouldn't give me the benefit of the doubt. A girl in the back raised her hand. "So what do we do? Just accept it?" "No," he said firmly. "You learn the rules so you can change them. You study law, policy, community organizing. You run for office. You become the dispatcher, the officer, the judge. Because if good people stay out, the system stays broken." After class, 3 students stayed behind. One asked for an internship. Another wanted help writing a letter to the city council about street lighting in their block. The third just said, "Thanks for not talking down to us." That meant more than any award. Back at his office, the real test of change wasn't in speeches, it was in data. His team tracked every suspicious person stop across the city. Before the new law, over 70% involved black or brown residents, despite them making up only 30% of the population. 6 months after the reforms, the number dropped to 42%. Not perfect, but moving even better. Complaints about disrespectful treatment fell by half. Officers were using de-escalation tactics more, and when mistakes happened, because they still did, they were reviewed openly, not buried. One afternoon, he got a call from the police chief. "We had an incident this morning," she said. Officer stopped a young man near the library. Said he looked out of place. But instead of detaining him, the officer asked his name, verified he was a student, and even walked him to his bus stop when it started raining. He smiled. "That's the shift. It's small," she said, "but it's real." He knew small was how big things started. The 2 officers from that day, the ones who'd arrested him, had taken different paths. The older one had retired quietly, moved to a small town upstate. He sent a letter once, months later. "I'm taking a community mediation course, trying to make up for lost time." No signature, just those words. The younger one still worked in the department, now in the youth engagement unit. He'd started a program where officers played basketball with teens after school, not to keep an eye on them, but to build real relationships. He never reached out directly, but the man heard through others that the officer kept a printed copy of the new policy manual on his desk, dog-eared and highlighted. He didn't need an apology. He needed proof that people could change, and that was enough. One evening, he attended a community dinner hosted by a local church. Fried chicken, collard greens, sweet tea, simple food, warm company. He sat at a table with elders, pastors, and a few off-duty officers who'd come not in uniform, but as neighbors. An older woman, her hair silver, leaned over. "They say you turned your pain into purpose." He shook his head. I just refuse to let it be wasted. She patted his hand. That's purpose enough. Later, walking back to his car, yes, the same one now with new tires, he passed a young boy riding a bike with training wheels. The boy wobbled, then fell. He didn't cry, just got back up, adjusted his helmet, and tried again. The man watched him for a moment. That's what this was, he thought, falling, getting up, trying again. Not perfectly, but honestly. He drove home slowly, windows down, spring air cool on his face. His apartment was quiet, no messages flashing, no emergencies. Just peace, but he knew the work wasn't done. There would always be another stop, another assumption, another moment where bias could override justice. The goal wasn't to erase every mistake, it was to build a system that caught itself before harm was done. The next morning he arrived early at the office. On his desk was a package with no return address. Inside was a framed photo, black and white, slightly grainy. It showed him standing outside the precinct the day he was released, suit wrinkled, eyes tired but clear. On the back, someone had written, "This is the day we started seeing each other." He hung it on the wall, not as a trophy but as a reminder, because the truth was, his title had gotten him out of handcuffs, but it shouldn't take a title to be treated like a human being. And until that was true for everyone, for the student, the delivery driver, the grandfather walking home, there was still work to do. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began drafting the next phase of training modules. Not about laws, not about procedures, but about seeing, really seeing. And as the sun rose over the city, casting long, hopeful shadows, he kept writing, quietly, steadily, humanely, knowing that real change wasn't loud. It was the sum of 1,000 small choices made every day by people who chose dignity over fear. That was the legacy he wanted. Not a story about one man's arrest, but a system that finally learned to see everyone as they truly are, worthy, whole, and belonging.